All right. Welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, formerly carried on the Starcom radio network, now carried on YouTube because I decided that I wanted people to see my face. I am here. My name is Brenton Lengel. If you're just encountering me, I'm a poet. I'm a playwright. I've had 7 plays produced in New York City, and I'm a Ringo nominated comic author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. And I am here with Bobby B. of the Mustache Mafia podcast, formerly 5x5. And we are doing our much-awaited Chapter 3 of Homage to Catalonia. How you doing, Bob? You want to introduce yourself to the audience if they're just catching up right now?
Oh, I'm outstanding. I'm Bob. I'm from the Mustache Mafia podcast. We are rebranding because it turns out there's about 50 or 60 people who like to use the 5x5 name, and we didn't know that. Capitalist media's hard, kids. I'm pretty new to actually doing public podcasting and public discourse like this. So when you're finding me at the very beginning. So congratulations, you're on the ground floor, kids.
Yep, he's going to be just as big as Chapo Trap House. In fact, we are already as big as Chapo Trap House. You just don't realize it yet.
I really need to lose a lot of weight because that's like 6 people.
Oh yeah, and Matt Crispin's pretty big on his own. I shouldn't say that because I'm like 225 pounds. But
I'm about there right now too, man. I ain't doing PT during the lockdown.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I have not been training as much karate as I would have liked. I did a few classes online, but my sleep schedule has been so thrown off by COVID that they're like, yeah, can you make the class at 5 p.m.? And I'm like, wow, that's really early for me.
It's biker's morning, man.
Yeah, hang on for just a second because I'm going to be.
Yep.
Why don't you let the audience know? I'm tweeting this out right now.
Yep.
And I just wanted to, there we go. I can get you and Rocco in this. Why don't you let people know what's been going on so far in the story?
Yeah, so we're following Homage to Catalonia, which is a really great book that you should pick up any way you can, including on audiobook, which you can see on YouTube for free, hypothetically. This is the account of George Orwell joining a left Marxist militia during the Spanish Civil War. It's really well written. It's a great conversational kind of style. Almost written kind of as a travelogue to its benefit and detriment at some points, but it's a great firsthand account of the actual conduct of the Spanish Civil War and the ideological factors that just peppered the whole thing. So far, we've joined George Orwell in a very, very rushed basic training for his militia, which I criticized a little more than I probably meant to, but it's worth noting.
you were up there like, screw these people.
Yeah. My army brain kicked in, man, and I can't help it. I'm still a little bit programmed. Chapter 2 was Orwell's transition to the front line, and we got to see a lot of what the Spanish Civil War had been doing to the interior of the country and the places that he would be fighting in. And we were introduced to his position on top of a mountain that he was really, really upset that it wasn't more of a combat post. But we'll see later in later chapters that he probably should have been a little bit glad that it was less of a
combat post,
hot position, yeah.
Orwell's a very good writer, and I guess he was an okay police officer since he quit, which is the best thing a police officer can do. You'll see he does not necessarily make a good soldier. He's honestly probably better than most of the people, especially right out of the gate here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's had the training he had as a police officer. We think. Well, we're having an issue with militarized police in this country right now, so it actually might be fair. But we think of him getting like police training at your local police department. He was really like a colonial policeman, which is a little bit more approaching what a military type person would be, because it's not necessarily just the guy who's just enforcing the law. He's also enforcing British mandate overseas. So he would have gotten a little bit more military training than like your average cop now would. Or your average cop in like America circa 1937 would have.
Yeah, and so he knows how to use a gun. He knows his way around like command structure and everything.
Mm-hmm.
He was motivated, I think, partially by a desire to write about the experience of war, but also by class loyalty and a zeal for the revolution that he had witnessed in Barcelona. to instead of just being a war correspondent, to really become the story himself, to do the thing that journalists are not supposed to do.
Exactly, everything a journalist isn't supposed to do. But you almost can't help it, even as you're reading this, or if you're reading the history of the Spanish Civil War. I mean, he fell. I don't want to say fell victim to that. He had that experience, and Hemingway even had that experience. And Hemingway, at that point, while he was like very much a fetishist of like courage and masculine bravery, also kind of a cynic. So it tells you something about the divisiveness of this cause, that these guys were falling into it from overseas, which is something that we've discussed in great detail in a couple previous chapters.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I probably, if I had been unmarried at the time, and Orwell was actually married, but I guess his wife was cool with it. Like, I had some friends who, when I was at and I'm wearing my Dragon Con shirt. My first year at Dragon Con was 2014, which was right after my period of being the most radical. So like, I was still very much like Brent the Anarchist at Dragon Con with like all of my fellow geeks. And like, people would come up to me. I had like a shirt with like with the Zapatista on. It's the red star with the black, and people thought I was like wearing the shirt of the Winter Soldier. And I had to be like, no, my costume is I'm an anarcho-communist.
I just choked on cigar smoke. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Also, I saw a comment on the last chapter that said I should quit smoking. I'm not going to. So spoiler for the next few chapters.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's interesting too, because I was actually the one who was visibly smoking in the thing. I was by the way, for people, this is not pot. This is actually CBD oil, and it's wonderful, and it has helped me drink less and engage in a lot of other destructive behaviors far less. So, hey, props to CBD oil.
Well, I'm just smoking capitalist Nicaraguan tobacco while I criticize the fascist movement. So I like irony, kids.
Of course. Oh, you criticize society, yet you participate in society. How clever.
That dude has one joke, but it's super important.
So let's get into this chapter. So where last we left, he was going through the town. There were bullet holes in all the walls, and there was a great deal of shall we say fecal matter in the church and several other places. Society has completely
broken down.
So like where do we go from here?
So we left off in chapter 2 with him taking his first bit of fire, where he promised himself he wouldn't duck, and he did. And we went into detail about this last chapter, but everybody ducks, and it's a good idea to duck if you're being shot at. But
duck if you're being shot at.
Duck if you're being shot at.
Bobby B.
That's my best life advice to you. Don't take too much of my other life advice, but take that one. But he actually starts off with an interesting little list. He has a bunch of lists in this chapter. He's starting to gripe, and a little something about soldiers in history. And in every war, in every era, soldiers complain. Soldiers complain constantly because war sucks, and complaining kind of helps you vent. And this chapter is a lot of Orwell's complaints, and it's kind of heartwarming for me because I had a lot of these same complaints in my military service.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Great. So what are his complaints, and where do they line up with yours?
So we start off, and actually does pretty much line up with me, except separated by almost a century, I guess. But he has his list of important things on the front, and it's tobacco, firewood, food, candles, and the enemy, in that exact order.
The enemy.
Well, and it was funny to me because I started smoking more heavily when I first deployed to Afghanistan. I started ordering cigars on the internet, and they were they were delivered by cargo plane to Afghanistan, which just
could you get Cubans?
I could, and I'll tell you how off stream, but I might have a couple in the humidor right now. But hypothetically, in Minecraft, I might have some Cuban cigars.
You might have some Minecraft Cuban cigars. When I was in college, one of the things we did was we drove up to Windsor, Canada, just right over the border from Detroit. Yeah. And in Windsor, the two things, you could get Cuban cigars, and you could drink if you were 18.
Oh yeah, paradise.
Yeah. It was funny too, honestly, because the two times I went into Canada, like the first time I went into Canada, like it was really just ridiculously easy to get into Canada. And then like really like harrowing trying to get back into the United States. And the second time, it was awful trying to get into Canada. Like they searched our van and stuff, and just like incredibly easy getting past the border into the United States.
You gotta keep those hosers out of Canada, eh? That's my offensive Canadian accent. I'm not even going to attempt a Spanish one, so don't worry. But the tobacco interested me a little bit because most of the people, would probably be like 60-40 that I knew in the military used tobacco of some kind, mostly chewing tobacco. And
yeah, well, I mean, this was well before, like, I mean, in World War II, didn't they hand out cigarette rations to like literally every soldier?
Yeah. Officers got Luckies, and enlisted guys got, I think, Pall Malls or like Old Golds or something.
Oh, jeez.
So there's a classified. Actually, they're handing out later in this chapter. They're handing out cigarette rations here too. But cigarettes in war and tobacco in war is actually something that really kind of helps you out a little bit. And I'm not encouraging anyone to use tobacco because then there's less cigars in the world for me to smoke. But it kind of helps you forget that you're so hungry because you're probably going to be deprived of food.
That tracks.
Yeah, it'll keep you awake on a sentry duty. It kills time, and it gives you a way to kind of socialize with your friends. So you're living and you're fighting with these guys, and you're in a harrowing situation. And if you can all kind of sit down and bond over something, tobacco is actually historically something that's been used as that. So it was kind of.
By the way, we've got a comment from Mustache Mafia. I'm guessing this is Rocco.
It is Rocco.
Yeah, so there was a tobacco shortage for a while when we were in Afghanistan. All they had was Camel crushes, and that was it. Everyone smoked them, and we all complained. The memories. Bring back gin rations.
well, Rocco, man, like I told you to just buy cigars, but you didn't listen to me. And you smoked, and I'm gonna out Rocco a little bit here. He smoked those mentholated Marlboros, and I don't know how the hell he did that for all those years.
You know, it's funny also, there was a guy I met on the Appalachian Trail who was a Vietnam vet, and he went to prison for like 10 years for beating up cops. They set him up. But like, cause when he came back, he joined Veterans Against the War. And, so like that did not go well. Cause, Hoover, I think wanted them, if it was Hoover at the time, wanted them all to be felons so that they couldn't be armed. But he had just started smoking again on the Appalachian Trail because he'd quit in prison.
Because he quit in jail. That's hilarious. But the other stuff is mostly creature comfort. So we're talking about firewood to keep warm, food to, keep going, but it's also, you want to enjoy what you're eating. So like trying to get good food is very important. Candles, because we're going to talk about this probably in a little more detail. We talked about it last chapter. This is still a world that's lit mostly by fire in Spain. And these guys don't have flashlights. Their dugouts that he's talking about, they don't have like electric lights. It's not like they have a generator on the reverse side of the hill powering the place. So if they want to see at night, or if they want to read a book at night, they've got to have a candle going. So it's another creature comfort. And the enemy is dead last because they're in a position warfare. So their enemy is like 700 meters away. So while they're probably thinking of the enemy every day, it's probably not high up in their thoughts because these guys are just shooting and missing at each other over this valley. So I thought that was really interesting way to open up that chapter.
It almost reminded me when I watched it. Did you ever watch that series Red versus Blue?
The Halo one?
Yeah, the Halo one.
No, I didn't.
in the first issue, like the very first episode of it, like the two Halo guys, they're sitting there and they're kind of making fun of the video game, but it sort of struck a chord with me when I was reading this chapter because like it starts off on like the one guy says to the other guy, he's like, "Hey, do you ever wonder why we're here?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the great questions of life. Like, why are we anywhere? I mean, like, are we the product of some coincidence or is there a God? I don't know, but it keeps me up at night." And he's like, "No, like, why are we here in this box canyon here defending this base? Because the only thing that I can figure out here is that the blue team is over on the other side, on their side of the box canyon in their base. And the only reason we put a base here is they put a base over there." He goes, "Well, yeah, but that's because we're fighting each other." He's like, "Yeah, but even if we left tomorrow, they would just own two bases in the middle of a box canyon."
Yeah, it's hilarious, but that is actually kind of an interesting point when you're analyzing a war, because we talked last time about the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of analyzing warfare. So Orwell is very much at the tactical level here. He's at the lowest level,
Right.
And he only sees that he's stuck in this crappy mountain position with cigarettes that are probably getting wet from the snow and like one blanket, and he doesn't understand the point of this. But if you look at it more broadly on that front, they're occupying a very important operational position, and they're denying the fascists an avenue to advance over the mountains.
Right.
And at the strategic level, then that would, change the whole shape of the front and the war. So you kind of, you never really get used to it, but when you read something at the tactical level, you also have to understand that there's a grand strategy going on too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Orwell's not seeing the grand strategy. He's just seeing, I'm stuck on this mountain,
yeah,
taking
exactly.
pot shots at these guys 700 meters away with an antique rifle and wondering what the hell did I do with my life to get myself here?
Yeah, you got a fine arts degree, bro. That's what happened. He could have been in the East India Company, but no.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the same thing. Honestly, that's one of the things that I really identify with Orwell when he's doing like Down and Out. By the way, hi HT Olson, sup? Welcome back to the stream. Because like when I was basically like when I was at Dragon Con, I had some friends, and we're still friends to this day, but they were like trying to convince me to go fight with the PKK YPG.
Oh,
and and I'm sitting there and I was like, man, if it was like 25, this might actually work. And one of them was like, what, you don't want to go and fight with this new anarchist revolution? What kind of an anarchist are you? I'm like, yeah, the kind that doesn't want to get shot at.
Yeah, for very little possible benefit.
Yeah.
that was big in the American veteran community for a very long time, actually.
PKK YPG?
Yeah, which is ironic because that community tends to skew heavily towards the right.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, if you can get rid of like the, I find oftentimes if you get rid of the tribalistic aspect of it, it's like when you talk to somebody who's like on the right and you just are like, I think we should tax rich people like they can earn $2 million and then just take everything after that, or take 70% of it or whatever. And like a lot of Republicans will be like, yeah, that sounds great. But then like you tell them that like that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's plan. They're like, well, we can't have that. That's socialism. So like if it's something like PKK YPG is something they've never heard of, they'll go over there and they'll be like, yeah, this is awesome. I love these guys. But then you say, oh, they're freaking Democratic Confederalists. They'll say, I don't know what that is, so that doesn't matter. But then you go, oh, well, they got it from Murray Bookchin, who was an anarcho-communist. They'll be like, communism?
Yeah, and that kind of happens over the course of this book whenever he encounters like fascist deserters or prisoners too, which is kind of cool. It happened last chapter when the Spanish partisan guy was like cooing and reassuring the poor little fascist that he was going to be okay.
Everything's going to be fine. So continue. I'm sorry.
So there are like no machine guns. There's no artillery in this position, and it's just a pure positional warfare thing. And to keep up with my little theme here, and this is going to guide a little bit of the understanding of the rest of this chapter in mountain warfare, I've got another Clausewitz quote. So congratulations, kids.
Yay! We could just change this to the Clausewitz.
I mean, hey, if you want to do a book review of On War, man, I'm down, and I know Rocco would be down for that too. But
but then I have to read On War, and I can instead I can have On War read to me by you. So
it's a little division of labor there. So this is a quote from his section on mountain warfare, and some of it might be a little obscured because I'm not going to read you the entire multiple page chapter of this. But in regard to mountain warfare in general, we should observe that everything depends on the skill of our subordinate officers, and still more on the morale of our soldiers. Here it is not a question of skillful maneuvering, but of warlike spirit and wholehearted devotion to the cause. For each man is left more or less to act independently. That is why national militias are especially suited to mountain warfare. While they lack the ability to maneuver, they possess the other qualities in the highest degree. So when you're in a mountain, you're obviously not going to be doing like blitzkrieg giant flanking maneuvers. You're not going to be doing counter marches. You're not going to be really able to flank unless you can go around the entire mountain range. So this is actually a really good position for the POUM guys because they don't have the mechanized doctrine that the fascists might. They don't have the same equipment that the fascists do, but they've got motivation and they've got a really good position to defend. So this is like the perfect place to actually put Orwell's militia. Yeah. Even though it's awful for the poor militiamen who have to occupy this terrible position.
Sure, but they're kept up there by by revolutionary discipline.
By revolutionary discipline, which we're going to get into in probably great detail in this chapter. He's noting that they never really hit each other, and the machine gunners are especially bad at their jobs.
Yeah, good.
But there's something to note kind of about fire in modern warfare, not the video game, but the actual modern warfare, especially with machine guns, is that the majority of the fire that a soldier in a modern war actually puts down range isn't necessarily to kill the enemy, but it's to suppress them. So those,
so like on Archer, when you've got the Chris Parnell's character going suppressing fire and just firing randomly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you also see it in a lot in Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, which probably a lot of people have also seen, where you're trying to keep the guy's head down so you can maneuver into a better position to actually kill them.
That makes sense. I've done similar things like it's like paintball tactics. People will do that.
Yeah, it's the same principle, except the paintball has much less range and isn't going to kill somebody. Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying there was there were some guys, I forget who it was, but I heard this story about them. They were like frat guys, and they decided that what they were going to do instead of wear the paintball mask was they were going to play in Oakleys, and because Oakleys are advertised to block bullets. But it's just the lens, and I don't actually think that's true. So like what wound up happening was this one dude took a paintball to the eye and the lens, and he took it like straight in the eye, and he had to lay on his back in bed for like a month, and if he moved, his eye might explode.
Oh God!
The doctors told him.
It's more for just for the record. It's more for like shrapnel and bullet like residue and bullet like pieces that would fly off a side of a wall or something is what those are designed for. Not to actually stop a bullet.
You're talking about Oakleys, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Orwell doesn't have any of that here because they don't even have moments. There's actually a little bit of there's a few good moments, little what the hell moments in this chapter too. I'll break up the Clausewitz quote with a little bit of a funny story. Is that they get these grenades. He says.
I'm remembering this. Okay, continue.
He says they're on the level of like a Mills bomb, and something a little bit of a weapons nerd thing for you guys in the audience is that in 1900 most militaries had completely abandoned using hand grenades in Europe because they thought they were useless, because they were thinking of grenades like from the 1700s, which were essentially like iron pots filled with gunpowder that you would chuck at somebody. So that's not a really effective modern weapon. But by like 1915, the British had started issuing Mills bombs, and the Germans had started issuing the famous stick grenade.
Yeah, so, which you see on the still the plastic army men. They still occasionally have like the gray army man throwing the stick grenade.
And something to remember about those manufactured grenades, even today, is that the fuse on those grenades is 3 to 5 seconds. It's not 5 seconds. It's not 3 seconds.
Oh no!
It's somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds. So even if you're using a modern grenade, it's dangerous. But these grenades are held together with tape. The safety on the grenade is held together with tape. And I can only imagine what kind of tape they're getting in the middle of the Spanish Civil War to hold the freaking safety of a grenade on. Yeah. And Orwell actually notes that they're more likely to kill the guy who's throwing it than it is to kill the guy who's hitting it. But the funny the funny thing that happens is one of the untrained conscripts actually chucks one of the grenades into the fire while they're all sitting in the fire at night. God. And like a modern grenade will have like something like a 25-meter kill radius as advertised on the manual. So like I'm imagining these poor guys, it's a long day, they might have been on patrol, or they might have been like digging a trench or something, and all of a sudden this idiot throws a freaking grenade in, and they have to run like 50 meters away to take cover so they don't die. But that does kind of tie into that Clausewitz quote a little bit, in that like these guys aren't like professional soldiers. So again, it's a good thing that they're in this really defensible position where they don't have to do too mumuch professional soldier stuff.
They mainly just have to stay motivated, stay there, and keep the fascists from advancing.
Exactly. He also notes that it's about a 1.5 mile walk between their position and the fascist position. Because even though it's 700 meters, the way you have to walk wound up being over a mile.
Because it says the 700 meters as the crow flies. But because in the mountains, like when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, like the actual like as the crow flies was less than 2,200 miles, but up and down and up and down and around and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, great. Shipwreck Shark comes in. I finally get to watch one of your videos, and we finally get to have you watching one of our videos. We're very happy about it. Okay, so continue. They just the idiot threw the grenade in the fire. One probably ran.
Yeah, he doesn't go into great detail on that, but I pictured it a lot. So wars of position are always super boring, but you kind of do settle into a routine, which Orwell talks about. He's talking about like digging trenches, going on patrol, standing guard, digging trenches, going on patrol, standing guard, eating, going to sleep. So that's kind of the reality of warfare that some people don't really appreciate. Like I was listening earlier to a little podcast about Napoleon because I'm a pathetic nerd, but
yeah, that's pretty nerdy.
It is pretty nerdy. But I was thinking about this book as I was listening to that, and I realized that we talk about like the battles that last a few hours or maybe a few days in the worst cases, but we don't talk about like the soldiers who had to march like 2,000 miles to get to that battle. We don't talk about like the guy who had to stand guard duty in the camp the whole time, because warfare really is very boring and it's punctuated by moments of like absolute horror. And reading something like this really hammers that home to you.
You know, there's a line in it, and I don't know if they've gotten this in yet. I actually worked this line into my play that I was working on. I gave it to a character who was a Russian, but he said, "This is not a war. This is a comic opera with occasional death."
Yeah, that's in this chapter. The officer actually says that towards the end of the Polish, Jewish, French, Belgian dude, which is like one of the coolest things ever. He's this guy. So we're settling into position warfare. The only town that's near them is Rogres, and I'm mispronouncing that because I'm going off of an Orwell pronunciation that I looked up in the audiobook because I was curious, and I don't think his Spanish was any better than mine was. So
probably not.
Yeah, and it's in he says loyalist possession, so I don't know if that means the fascists or them. I was curious.
Yeah, that doesn't. I would assume loyalist position would mean they were loyal to the Republic, and the fascists were the first ones to revolt. But you don't want to call fascists the revolutionaries. You know?
Yeah, you don't. So it's kind of curious. So I was a little curious if you knew about that one. He also talks that there were a few offensives. Most of them ended in kind of like disaster for either side. But several thousand men had died trying to take a town on his front from his sector. So that kind of shows you, again, like the strength of the defense in warfare. Clausewitz actually says that defense is the strongest form of warfare, but offense is the only way that you can actually guarantee victory. So,
which is I gotta say, that's very, very different from hand-to-hand fighting. Like, one-on-one, this is one of the things that like drives me crazy about like the Democrats and the way they approach politics, is they're always trying to be defensive. And the thing is that you find like, and you would know this as a boxer, but like, as a Kyokushin Kai, one of the things that I learned was attack, attack, attack.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that if you try to be defensive and respond to what your opponent throws at you, you are allowing your opponent to set the terms of the fight. Yeah. And that will almost, unless you're incredible, that will almost always result in a defeat. And even if you are incredible, well, if you're incredible, you can just beat him on offense anyway. So what the hell are you doing wasting your time?
Yeah, counterpunching is also an important metaphor, though, for this kind of fighting.
True.
So like if you make your opponent miss by an inch, you can really exploit that.
And by the way, I'm known. I'm very much known for my counterpunch.
Yeah, I like counterpunching, but I get stupid when I get hit. So I start off trying to box like more like Sugar Ray, but then like about 35 seconds into the first round, I start boxing like Duran.
Yeah, well, everybody's got a plan until they get hit.
Yeah, exactly, which is something that comes up later in this chapter too. So we're settling into basically attempted trench raiding and patrolling in this chapter. Orwell, he does actually mention that he's kind of finally learned how to duck because he goes up to the fascist lines, and he's mentioning that he's crawling very carefully. So it's like, good work, man. You learned a good lesson there, George. But he crawls up to the fascist lines, and something kind of interesting happens where he's hearing the fascists talk and sing. And up to this point, and even throughout the rest of the book, he refers to the other soldiers as the fascists. But there's this little moment here of kind of humanization, where he's seeing these guys and they're just like talking and singing just like anybody else. And it kind of does hammer home too that this is like a conscript army he's fighting, and they're not highly motivated. They let this relatively untrained British dude crawl close enough to their position to hear them talking and smoking and joking. Like that's not like the hyper competent fascist military that we're used to seeing in media.
In movies. Yeah. And I mean, part of that is that fascists are screw ups, and they always wind up like the what we see in the movies. Like the Third Reich was a complete clown show. I remember one of the craziest things about it was that Hitler he was a big fan of these American cowboy adventure novels, and was constantly like sending them out to his generals being like, do the war like this. It would be like if Donald Trump was like the biggest fan of Harry Potter and like went out to like General Mattis or something and was like, okay, you need to handle the war against ISIS like Harry did against Voldemort.
Man, I've got some stories from the Pentagon I can tell you off stream.
Okay, I look forward to hearing those.
But yeah, suffice to say that there's a lot of screw up talk like that too. But Stalin, curiously, was also a fan of American cowboy movies.
Oh yeah, no, he made people watch movies with him constantly. The Stalin. There's a great thing like Stalin After Dark. It's like the second issue of Behind the Bastards podcast, and like they talk about like how you had like especially after the war, you had to party with Stalin.
Well, I mean, you have the choice to party with Stalin or party in Siberia. And
party with Stalin or party in Siberia. And then also Stalin, he was his drinks, because his doctor had told him he had to water his drinks down to 50% strength with water. So the thing was, you had to drink with Stalin, but Stalin was drinking half of what you were drinking, and no one was allowed to stop until Stalin was drunk.
Oh God, there's a curious story about him, and I'll promise I'll get back to this right after this one, where FDR reversed the proportions on his martinis because he actually liked the taste of vermouth. So instead of 2 ounces of gin and like half an ounce of vermouth, he would have 2 ounces of vermouth and like half an ounce of gin.
Gross.
Stalin had one of those at a party, and like he grimaced and he's like, "It's cold on the stomach." And it's true. I tried it. It is really cold on the stomach. But another curious thing happens as he's crawling up to this fascist position. He actually recaptures one of their flags that the fascists had, and it kind of shows you how unmotivated and how little pride the fascists have that they have this trophy, and most armies would take that as a trophy. Like I guarantee you, if an American formation took like an ISIS flag, that would be a trophy that they would send back to the base, or somebody would put in their war chest forever. But these guys just have it sitting on the floor.
Flag, apparently.
And Orwell takes it back. So it shows you that he's kind of fighting a conscript army that's not highly motivated and doesn't really have skin in this game. But then something also curious happens is that when he takes it back to his position, they just tear it up and use it for like wadding in their guns.
And it's a POUM flag that they tear up, or is it like a Spanish Republic flag?
It's a Spanish Republic flag. He doesn't go into great detail about which one it is, because he also does mention in this chapter that the fascists usually use the royalist flag on all of their positions. But there's like half a dozen flags on all the different militias going.
Because you got all the different militias, you got the anarchists, you've got but I'm not surprised that POUM guys would tear up a Spanish Republic flag. They're not going to have any particular love for the Republic. They just happen to be fighting with it because fascists.
And
it's kind of like like some of my neighbors, they put out like freaking Trump flags, and I got pissed about it, and I was like, should I fly a Biden? No, I'm not going to fly a Biden flag. So it's like, what flag do I fly to spite the Trump people?
Well, if you fly like an ANCOM flag, like they're not going to know what it is.
Exactly, they're not, because that was what I was thinking immediately. I was like, oh, I'll get a CNT5 flag. They're not going to know what that is.
Just fly a Bernie flag, man. Like
a Bernie flag might really work.
Probably would.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. So continue.
Well, it's also interesting because he goes into pretty great detail about how the militias are raised, and he talks about how they're raising the popular army now, which I gather is the more professional force that the Spanish Republicans raised. Yeah. So it's being trained, and these undisciplined militia guys are holding the line while that army is being trained and equipped. And the trade unions all kind of raise their own militias, and that's really interesting because it does go to war as politics continued through violence. So all of these disparate political groups are raising their own militias to continue their political struggle through violence. And that's something that again, I really kind of want to hammer home about, like the nature of military science, especially from the modern perspective here, is that like warfare just doesn't happen. It's the continuation of politics.
Yeah.
And especially in this one, because there you've got all these disparate left political groups raising their own militias and fighting kind of together, which is a very unique kind of thing in world history. You don't see that too often. You usually see one hierarchical organization raise an army against another hierarchical organization.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, also the world is kind of very different. Even before this, a lot of, like in Germany, for instance, like a lot of groups would have their own paramilitary organizations. That's when you got the street fights between the black shirts in Italy and various like anarchist organizations and other socialist ones. Same thing with the brown shirts in Germany against like early Antifa. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and it kind of leads us into talking about revolutionary discipline, which is, I know, something that you wanted to discuss about this. And it is a very curious, coming from a very hierarchical military organization for like almost the better part of the last decade, and reading about this, because these guys, they don't have rank in the same way that like a conventional army does. They do have officers and NCOs, but they don't have like a hierarchy. They're not segregated socially from their troops. Theoretically, in the modern army, we're much less vindictive and draconian than like old conscript armies used to be. So the criticisms he's levying against traditional armies don't apply as much now. But like still,
right.
He mentioned specifically that you could walk up to a general and slap him on the back and ask him for a cigarette.
Right.
And like the 3 times I saw generals before I transitioned to Washington, like I would never do that. That's like unheard of. A general might talk to you and you have to be very nice to him. And, it's a faux social interaction, but that would never happen. And he also mentions that they have to argue sometimes with the newer guys to get them to follow orders or do unpleasant tasks. But something very curious happens, is that the more they're under fire and the more they adjust to the realities of the war that they're in, the more willing they are to take on dangerous tasks or unpleasant duties, and the quicker they react to orders. So they're kind of being trained on the front, which is not the best way to do it, but it's working. And it's genuinely surprising from a modern military perspective to see that working, because you think you need very rigid control over your soldiers. And Orwell even mentions that like people who are used to supervising people are shocked when he tells them about this. But they actually managed to do a non-hierarchical kind of discipline. And even and the cool thing is that while they didn't have stratification in the way that a traditional army does, they did have roles. So Orwell goes from being a corporal, freshly promoted corporal, to like a acting lieutenant here. So he does have a role, and he even admits that like it's not complete equality, because there are still some people who are in charge because they know what they're doing, but it's not a hierarchical kind of like, I'm an officer, therefore I'm a better class of person than you.
Exactly. Well, this is fascinating to me because I've worked as a manager and I've been in leadership positions a lot throughout my life, be it that I'm a manager or that I'm a wilderness guide, like taking people through like, Iceland or like, the Adirondacks or whatever. And like, one of the things that I've noticed is like there's certain things you do have to do to kind of maintain your authority and to keep people in line. But also, like, usually, like, as a manager, your job really, like, what the nuts and the bolts of the job is to build and maintain essentially a human machine. And once you've got that machine built, once you have those relationships built, it's mainly about managing conflicts, soothing people's egos, and keeping everybody moving in the same direction. And that can be taken care of in a lot of ways. Anarchists traditionally use facilitators as opposed to bosses. But like, this is people are a lot smarter, I think, than we give them credit for. And it's very easy to get very frustrated with them when they do stupid stuff. But like, I think overall, I've been amazed at when you give people actual control over what they're doing, how much more they give you and how much harder they try. And when you take that away, and when somebody doesn't feel like they're in control of their own life, that's when they really start like slacking and doing things poorly. And, that sort of as a manager contributed to me having some of the lowest turnover when I was a manager, specifically because these people had skin in the game with me. I did my own form of revolutionary discipline, essentially.
Yeah, and in the modern U.S. Army, you're always supposed to be kind of acting as if you can do the job 2 ranks above you. So you're always trying to work for the next job. And the modern military structures in the West, especially the ones that I'm familiar with, they don't want to train robots like Franco's training conscript robots.
Yeah.
That don't think for themselves. You want somebody who can act independently and kind of think outside the box. And that's not something you're going to get with a conscript army, but it is something you're going to get with highly ideologically motivated troops like these guys have. And I actually wrote this down. I was never a special forces soldier, but one of the first principles of special warfare is people are more important than equipment.
Yep.
And we're seeing that here because these guys don't have the equipment. Orwell specifically mentions that they have like 15 mortars in stock, but they only have 15 shells for each one of them. Or no, it's 5 mortars. Excuse me, it's 5 mortars with 15 shells a pop, which they're so valuable and they're so limited in the actual ammunition that they just stay in the town behind the lines.
Yeah, nobody uses them because
they can't afford to use them. And at the same time, the fascists can't bring their guns up the mountains because they don't have the motorized infrastructure to do so, or probably the roads. So they see a field gun once every so often and they miss because they can't range them. which was a problem back then because, again, we're modern people. So we're thinking in terms of like watching the Gulf War and seeing guided missiles and guided bombs, or we're thinking in terms of modern artillery, which has computerized targeting systems that'll be pinpoint accurate and never hit the same spot twice. But these guys are, Spanish conscripts who had to haul an artillery gun up a mountain and then kind of guesstimate with a slide rule about how far the parabola of the shell's going to go.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
Oh yeah, it would be awful. I mean, even in World War I, most of the artillery missed.
Yeah. And then you add in the fact that they're trained to miss anyway, essentially by society, and they haven't gone through the training to shoot directly at a person.
With artillery, it's a little different, and Orwell kind of touches on this in this chapter, where if you're aiming at a person, it is one thing, like you don't want to hit a person, but it's more academic with artillery.
Because I can already see that you're like, I want to hit over there and just kill the fascists that I'm sure are horrible people right over there.
Yeah, you're never going to see the guy you're shooting the artillery. You're going to see the explosion, and it's not a pleasant experience. But at the same time, it's not as visceral as shooting somebody with a rifle or a pistol.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah. So the fascists are similarly materially immiserated on this mountain too, which I find really funny and interesting. But the ideological motivation of the POUM guys keeps them kind of fighting and keeps them kind of in the game more than the fascists are. So I actually did write down another quote. Orwell does mention that they've won very few victories, but these very poorly trained and very poorly equipped guys actually won a few victories against the modern army.
Yeah, which is really impressive. That was one of the things that I always kept in mind with like Occupy Wall Street. Yeah. Like we were like Occupy Wall Street, with very little exception. We were a bunch of kids who had no idea what was going on. This was the first time any of us had done anything like that. And the fact that like we were able to pull off what we pulled off on our more or less our first try, like really was shocking. And I think it's a testament to the actual system of thought that is anarchism and anarchist organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. On a funny note, Orwell, I wrote this down specifically, Orwell really can't put his arms down because he's wearing at least 15 articles of clothing.
Oh, jeez.
On the top of this mountain. He says he's very sensitive to the cold. But
so he's basically like he's the kid in Christmas Story.
Christmas Story. He mentions also that he only took off his clothes about 3 times in 80 days while he's up on this mountain.
Gross.
Which is gross, but like if you're thinking about it, like you're not going to be able to have a shower on the front line.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays most people pack like baby wipes to kind of wash themselves if they're on a field exercise.
Mhm.
But he couldn't get that. He couldn't get a flashlight. He couldn't get binoculars. He managed to buy a few pounds of candles, so he was kind of popular in the trenches because, again, like people are people even at war.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys really want creature comforts like firewood and candles, and they want to be able to see in the dark when they have to get up in the middle of the night if there's a trench raid.
Right.
So Orwell mentions people like stepping on him. It's really funny, but he also notes that the fascist MG gunners will waste about a drum of ammo, which would be, I think he's exaggerating here because that's about 100 rounds every time somebody popped their head up.
Yeah.
So he's got there's also an element of exaggeration in pretty much everybody's war stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would make sense for him, but it would have felt to him emotionally like a drum of ammo. Like essentially what he's saying is, "Holy crap! I can't believe that guy's still shooting."
Yeah, exactly. And they're short of everything on top of this mountain too. They're short of water to the point where Orwell has to ration his water and only shave every so often.
Yeah.
They don't have like really clean drinking water, and it's transported by mules up the mountain. Yeah, so you really kind of start to appreciate like the utter immiseration that you kind of would feel in a conflict like this. And
well, yeah, this part of the book actually really, I identified with it a lot because, again, Appalachian Trail, spent my time in the mountains for 6 months. And yeah, water is one of the absolute key things that to where I would like camp in an objectively worse place. Yeah. Like less beautiful, less space, maybe a worse shelter, as long as there was like a good water source. And there were times like I'd be like, oh, there's a shelter to sleep at here. I remember this at Bear Mountain in New York. There's the Bear Mountain shelter. It's a gorgeous spot. I actually went back after I was done with the AT and like took some people out there for a picnic one time. But there's no water. There's no spring. And so I'm like, well, that's a useless shelter. I'm just going to hike into town. So usually it goes like this, like when you're in the mountains, it's like water, food, shelter, friends. That's what you need.
Yeah.
Like period to be happy. And in that order, by the way.
Well, the good thing about being in a military unit is you kind of have ready-made friends because you've been fighting and living with these guys for months. And like, I guarantee you, even despite the language barrier, Orwell probably knew some of these militia guys better than he knew probably his best friends in England.
Oh yeah, I would agree with you on that.
That said, they're kind of gross because like he mentioned specifically somebody's using the trench as a latrine, and he doesn't say who, so I'm going to assume that they never discovered that. That's a beating, man. If you're living
in a trench and someone's using it as a latrine,
oh, it's grody.
Just go 50 feet away.
Please go back to the reverse slope of the mountain. He also notes that they only have like 15 greatcoats for over 100 men, and they have to change them out when they're on sentry duty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So again, this comes back to something we discussed in chapter 1, where amateurs will talk about tactics, and Orwell's an amateur in this case, because this is the first real experience of war. So he's talking a lot about the tactics that they're employing and like that no one's really fighting. But professionals will talk about logistics. So if he's really upset that they're not going on an offensive, he should really look at the fact that they don't have the logistics to support something like that. They've only got a few coats for these guys. He goes into great detail about the ammo that they have. The Spanish ammo he's talking about are all like reloads, and they gum up their firearms. The Mexican ammo that they get, he says, is slightly better. And the German ammo that they capture from the fascists, which is made in the factory, is brand new loads of bullets. So they're the best. And he always keeps a few on him just in case. But he's terrified to use his rifle because his rifle is like made out of lead pipes or something that they found. and while we have interchangeable parts now, it's not ideal to interchange parts of rifles, especially if they've been fired a lot, because they wear slightly differently. So when he's talking about these rifles that are being interchanged with older and newer parts, especially on these older ones that are manufactured in like the late 1800s, we're talking about rifles that aren't necessarily manufactured in what we would think of as a factory, because they didn't really have like machine stamping as much back then. So what we were talking about is still kind of like almost cottage industry artisans.
Yeah, they're made in, like almost like a smithy.
Yeah, exactly. During World War I, Spain actually had a thriving weapons export market because they were neutral.
Mhm.
But they would supply a lot of pistols to the French. And if you're a weapons nerd, you might know about the Ruby, which is the French semi-auto pistol. But different companies' magazines wouldn't fit other companies' Rubies, even though it was a standard design at that point. So when Orwell's talking about interchanging the parts on these rifles, that's the kind of industrial base that he's talking about, exchanging parts.
Yeah, and it's also noted that the Mexican rounds that they're getting are being sent, like, because Mexico is the only nation that's willing to help the Republic at this point. It's Mexico and Stalin.
Yeah.
And Stalin's helping them mainly just so he can steal all the gold and test his weapons, because he knows he's coming for this showdown with Hitler and the rest, and Mussolini and the rest of the Axis.
Yeah, and that would be a strategic level analysis of that situation that has tactical implications.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. Good to know.
Yeah. So you're learning how to analyze warfare from a more academic perspective than you would just get from consuming media at this point. So that's awesome. So if somebody takes that away from this, I'm very happy that I've done this little project.
Is to figure out essentially like how. Yeah, I love the knowledge that you're bringing to this, because you do focus on I think tactics and the things that immediately jump out to you, and you ignore everything that goes on underneath it. And that's something that people tend to who are amateurs tend to do in more than just warfare. Like writers, great example of that. Like if you look at like a Hollywood movie, like a terrible Hollywood movie, like say what?
Corona Zombies.
Corona Zombies. I haven't seen that one.
It's excellent. I highly recommend it. It's an overdubbed version of Hell of the Living Dead with like 15 minutes of new footage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds really fun. I'll check it out. Yeah. Or I was actually going to say Gods of Egypt.
Oh God.
Yeah. And the thing is like, and yeah, Gods of Egypt. I watched that and I was like, oh my, this is somebody's first play that they wrote in high school that somehow got made into like the guy's kind of talented, but that somehow got made into a major Hollywood production. Yeah. And so like the executives who were messing with it and putting in like they know that moments have to happen, that certain moments have to happen in the script at this time because they've read like one book on screenwriting. So that's what leads their thinking in much the same way that tactics might lead somebody's thinking. But the thing is that to tell a compelling story, things have to be earned. You have to put in the work to reach those moments for them to mean anything at all. And so like, again, it's like, in much the same way that Orwell was neglecting logistics and amateurs will neglect logistics, Hollywood, Hollywood executives neglect the logistics of their stories. Yeah,
exactly. And you can apply that to almost anything. So that's another cool thing about reading Clausewitz or reading philosophy in general, is you start to see the underlying function of different institutions, in this case, warfare.
Yeah, looking past the obvious to see essentially the essence or a more realistic understanding of the totality of what is happening at any given time.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a little CBD oil. That was almost like a high thought.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm drinking Japanese whiskey, so I'm not too far behind you.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that also would lead into a discussion of industrial culture, which would be a Frankfurt School stream, and those guys are actually getting run out of Germany around this time.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. So while this is happening here, we've got what's his face, Adorno, getting sent over to
he stops in New York and then winds up in LA.
He would have liked New York better, but he would have hated New York too.
Yeah, that's the love-hate thing about that. It's also kind of worth noting while we're talking about the logistics, he talks about how the militia on the mountain are exhausting the natural resources in the area. Mm-hmm. So like they have to light fires to keep warm or just to see in the dark or whatever, because they don't have flashlights, they don't have electrical power. But he's noting that like the wood is pretty much all gone. the best wood they have to actually wander under fire to get from down in the valley. The grass that starts fire starts to go away. And this is something, again, that people don't really appreciate about logistics, is that an army can theoretically forage in the field, especially in kind of a more agrarian society like Spain. You could theoretically expropriate food and you can hunt for firewood. But eventually if you're in a war of position like this, you're going to exhaust all of the natural resources in an area, which is both why your logistics are super important in war, and also a way that war is very economically destructive to places where it takes place. Because
the soldiers are running and destroying everything so that they can continue to do what they need to do.
Yeah, and you saw that in the American South when Sherman marched through Georgia. He wasn't just setting everything else on fire. He was also taking all the food to feed his soldiers. You saw this very starkly in World War I, where if you look at the front in World War I, it's not only like the no man's land that's destroyed, it's miles of countryside behind it where the soldiers are foraging for stuff. So this is something that's going to come back to haunt Spain for many years, actually, after the Spanish Civil War, is the economic destruction from this warfare. He also notes, and I found this really weird because I'm so used to GPS and maps and knowing exactly where I'm going or exactly where I am at all times, that Spain, he said, was never actually properly surveyed.
Oh,
which is crazy, because if you're anywhere in America listening to this, or Europe, or anywhere in the developed world, you can go down to your local government building and get an accurate survey of like your entire state, like down to the like 10th of a mile, basically. You can go on your smartphone that you might actually be listening to this on and go on Google Maps and find out exactly where to get somewhere. But Spain was never actually properly surveyed, which shows you kind of like the stagnation of this society that this revolution happened in. And it shows you kind of like how the immiseration and the backwardness of Spain over like the last 100 or so years of history leading up to this point kind of would lead to a pathological situation like this. Like they don't even know where everything is, which is nuts. But he also notes that the fascists have all the best maps, because of course they do.
Yeah, of course they would. Well, they've got a lot of money behind them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've noticed about people with different political inclinations is sometimes it grows out of strategies that you have to deal with the world. For instance, very much like as a writer, but in general, I'm a pantser. In that, like, I like to write by the seat of my pants. I like to live by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And that tactic tends to work really well for me. Particularly like, when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I sat down, try to figure out like, okay, I'm going to have a mail drop here. I'm going to have a mail drop here. I'm going to do this. No, this is hard. And I was just like, I just filled my pack with 7 days worth of food and started hiking north. And I'm like, I'll figure it out along the way. And I was noticing this because I was arguing with it's funny, actually. David Friedman and me are going back and forth on my Facebook wall. Like we're continuing the debate from several days ago. And like he keeps asking me, like he wants me to spell out like every aspect of how an anarchist society might solve the problems that are currently being dealt with by markets. And I'm like, well, look at the Spanish anarchists, look at this, look at that. And he's like, well, yeah, but you're not telling me how to do it right now. And I'm like, yeah, because it's not my thing.
Yeah. Well, and also you can have the best plan, and we discussed that earlier. And, and the militias guys had a really good plan when they're going up this mountain, but no plan does survive first contact with the enemy. Which is another depressing German gentleman who said that. I believe it was von Moltke, but I could be wrong about that. But
well, everybody's got a plan until they get hit.
Everybody has a plan until they get hit. And with war or with anything that you're doing in your life, you can have the best plan, but nothing survives friction. And we see a lot of friction up on these mountains because these guys go up in the mountains, and I'm sure their goal is to eventually take the other position, but they don't have the logistics to do it. The fascists constantly are shooting artillery at them when they can get the guns up the mountains, but they don't have the logistics to do it either. So we see this static position warfare kind of emerge on this front because their plans don't survive actual contact with reality. Yeah. And I mean, and I'm sure the original plan of the revolution initially was to take the whole country immediately.
Yeah. Which, by the way, like if they could have pulled it off, would have worked. If they had, I really feel like so with Caleb on last night, we did a bit on Buenaventura Durruti. Basically the anarchist Che Guevara, and we did like sort of part one of what's going to be a part two or possibly a 3-part series just about his life and death. And I really feel like spoiler, I really feel like when Durruti stopped advancing, when he was convinced by the command to wait, that was when the revolution was doomed. Now I can see why he was persuaded to wait and to not immediately march on Saragossa, because it seems like, okay, there's these military people, they're telling me to wait. It seems like we should be careful. This is a high stakes situation, but really it is that kind of revolutionary fervor. It's that Adelante that defeated the fascists in Barcelona, and really knowing what we know now about the fact that, the other people the other nations weren't going to support them and they weren't going to get the supplies they needed. Really, their only hope would have been to take the factories in the South, which I think I mentioned in our last stream, because they had no weapons or munitions factories.
You did, and Orwell kind of touches on that. And again, like I don't mean to like argue with you, but like the thing about counterfactuals is that you wind up not learning from what did happen. You kind of focus too much on what could have happened. So in this case, he actually talks about the criticism of the militias that a lot of people had, that they were undisciplined mobs, and he notes that all soldiers, fresh soldiers, are undisciplined mobs, which is true, which is why we have such detailed basic training in a modern army. But he also notes that like the thing that people should be analyzing from this occurrence isn't necessarily the lack of discipline or what could have happened. It's that these workers' militias that were raised by like trade unionists in cities with no expertise, no understanding of logistics. Not many of these guys had probably seen the inside of a military academy, and if they did, it was a fairly backwards Spanish one at that time. Had managed to hold the line against a mechanized army.
Yeah, which is just mind blowing, and that's the main reason, like this, or not the main reason, but one of the reasons I wanted you to read this book.
Yeah.
And your perspective on it as a soldier and as somebody that has relatively educated in radical politics.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and again, it might not be unique in world history, but it's certainly a very rare event in world history in this case. And when you take lessons from what did happen on this, you can apply it to organizing a protest movement today. You can apply it to organizing a political party today. You can apply it to studying the history of warfare. You can apply it to studying the history of this conflict. When you analyze what did happen, you learn the successful strategies that people employed, and you learn the things that they did that might not have been the best. But if you speculate on what could have happened, you can just go down a rabbit hole for like decades.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you go to a Barnes and Noble right now, there's whole bookshelves on of historical fiction of like, what if Robert E. Lee had eaten like scrambled eggs for breakfast instead of a tart at Gettysburg? Like it winds up being like a ridiculous butterfly effect. But when you're grounded more in kind of theory on any topic and analyzing what did happen, you tend to draw more productive lessons, which it was one of the more interesting things I actually took away from reading On War from Clausewitz, because I used to kind of be one of those guys who was like, well, what if this, that, or the other thing happened? And I would think about that for like weeks, and I'd be like, yeah, they were dumb not to do that. But like, when you analyze what did happen, you understand the material circumstances of the people on the ground, you understand their thinking, and you understand what went well and what went poorly. And you can
absolutely, so that you can hopefully do better in the future.
Exactly.
So what is, I believe we've come to the end of the chapter here. So what is...
There were two more like funny little stories from this chapter. One of them is Orwell's trying to take a Rambo picture with a machine gun emplacement.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah, and he's like, "Don't shoot, okay?" And the guy's like, "No, we won't shoot." And he lets out an auto burst, and Orwell has to duck. And that does kind of go back to that these guys aren't super well trained, and they don't have respect for their weapons. And Orwell notes that a lot of these guys had never touched a gun, to the point where they don't know how to disassemble it, they don't know how to assemble it, and they don't have like basic cleaning utensils for their guns. So like he talks about building a pull through, which is basically a brush that you would pull through the barrel of a gun to clean the carbon out from it. And it was like he invented fire. And I was thinking a lot of these guys probably had not only never seen a modern firearm before, but they had probably never seen like modern tools before. And
it makes sense, especially if they're peasants.
Yeah, so that's a level of like material immiseration that is like unheard of in Europe now, and difficult.
Well, again, like Spain was so incredibly backward at this point. I mean, like you look and you watch the Spanish Earth, and you see people like the if they don't have donkeys, you see people yoked like cattle, like pulling the that's how they're pulling the plow in the fields.
Yeah, and And he talks about having to use like Vaseline or pork fat or cold cream to lubricate his gun. And curiously, that would probably work. It wouldn't be a very good idea to use on a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a little kind of a funny little historical aside. The British used to use bacon fat to lubricate their bullets going down their initial rifles.
Mm-hmm.
That actually started a war in India.
I remember hearing about this. Yeah,
the Muslims didn't want to touch pork, and the Hindus didn't want to touch beef because it was beef or pork fat. So it wound up revolting. So that would kind of work, even though Orwell's pissed that he has to do it. And you kind of have to improvise, adapt, and overcome in certain materially immiserated circumstances like this.
Absolutely, which is frankly one of the things anarchists are really good at.
Yeah,
all of those things. Strong hearts and very little else.
Well, Americans are too, because we don't really plan.
No, we don't. So that was the first one. What was the second one that you had there?
The Sentry story that you wanted to get to when we did our first episode, where Orwell they have to use a password to come in and out of the lines. Mm-hmm. So that only the soldiers stationed on the mountain will know how to get in and out of the line, so a fascist infiltrator won't come in. And the password is like Catalonia Heroica, mm-hmm. But the guy doesn't understand what the word Heroica means because he's an illiterate peasant. and Orwell's like, well, it's like Valiente. So this poor guy is trying to come back into the lines. And he gets shot at because the guy goes Catalonia and he goes like Valorous or whatever. And it happens to Orwell a couple times too. Even though he knows the password, he'll like brush against a bush and then he'll take rapid fire from his own position.
Well, I mean, like again, not a war, comic opera with occasional death, and
which is exactly what Kopp says about the battle or the front.
Mm-hmm. Now there is, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a battle coming up in the fourth chapter, or did we already have it? Was that the one where he stole the flag back?
No, that was just him crawling up to the fascist line.
Yeah, because he got bored. Yeah. What's amazing about this is there's so many just little humanizing moments and so many things that happen in the book that honestly could be comedy bits. Dropping the grenade in the fire. In very much in the same way, like with you in basic training, where it's like pull the pin, throw the grenade. I thought you said throw the grenade, pull the pin.
Well, that kid did really throw his pin and keep his grenade. That really happened.
And like then there, you had that bit, you had the bit where the guy gets shot at. Like all of this is inherently silly. But it's also like one of the most like intense moments in human history, to tell you the truth, because essentially when you pull away from the micro and you see what's really happening with fascists trying to take over the country and ordinary people organizing to stop them, like that's high drama right there.
It really is. But even like the highest drama should kind of include moments of like humanity. Do you know what I mean? So like even in like the most dire situations, people find humor. There's humor from the trenches of World War I. If you go back like thousands of years, you can find Romans like drawing dicks on walls while they were besieging forts and stuff. Kilroy was here was a famous humor thing from World War II, which was one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. And you have U.S. soldiers drawing a little cartoon face on walls saying Kilroy was here.
The wall. Well, and not just that. Like, I think there's in like some cave somewhere. It's either a cave or it's a like a really tall cathedral. Yeah. Like they found like Viking writing like up at the top of it. People came. They found the Viking runes and they're like, "Oh, what does this mean?" And the runes read like, "This is really high."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And if you're curious about this kind of this humor and levity that people bring to these kind of weird situations, there's an online webcomic called Terminal Lance, and the guy's put out 2 graphic novels now. The first one's called The White Donkey, which is about Iraq, and then the second one was Battleborn that he just put out, which is about Afghanistan. But he includes like the absurd and hilarious bits that happen in warfare, juxtaposed with the horror of being a U.S. Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to reading this. I was all about webcomics in the early 2000s. I actually had my own called The Life Quixotic.
Yeah, this guy was a low level soldier and or Marine, excuse me, and he started writing a little webcomic, and now he's actually published by like Stars and Stripes. He's like the official Marine Corps comic now, even though he's like incredibly irreverent and hilarious.
Well, there's happens to be there's a lot of tolerance for artists. We're expected to a certain extent to be irrelevant, especially, and people will tolerate a lot if it contains truth. It's when the truth isn't there that people can really just be like, oh, screw this. All right, so we are at the end of the chapter. That was chapter 3, Homage to Catalonia. Bobby, do you want to plug your pluggables?
Yeah, absolutely. We're Mustache Mafia on YouTube. If you search us, we're the first. We should be like one of the first results. It's a little black emblem with our logo on it. We're also still listed as 5x5 podcast on SoundCloud. We just did like a podcatcher thing, so I think we're on Spotify and iTunes as well. You can find those links on our YouTube channel if you prefer just listening to the sweet dulcet sounds of my voice. Awesome. I'm Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter, and my compatriot is Space Rocco at Twitter, SPACE Rocco.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, I am about to, as soon as this stream ends, I'm going to be going live again with my official poetry reading to celebrate 1,000 subscriptions. And just so you guys can get a look at it before anybody else does, we will be reading a poem from my favorite author, Neil Gaiman. And it's going to be coming from this book. And if you want this particular book, this is a complete guide to Neil Gaiman's poetry. And if you want it, I'm sorry, you can't have it, because this was made by a friend of mine and given to me as a birthday gift when it was not my birthday. This is an example of COVID madness. And this book exists nowhere but my shelf. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and I'll be reading that and also going into some analysis of the poem. I think everybody's really going to like it. So just wait for like once this stream ends, just wait for like a minute, and then it'll come right back on. And I very much look forward to your comments on the poem itself. And I think you guys are really, really going to like this one because it's a great poem.
That's outstanding.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bobby. This is Brent of Brenton Lengel, of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, signing off. Please like, subscribe, and tell your friends, because I want this channel to continue to grow, so that we can, continue to entertain and horrify with tales of revolution. All right. I will catch you guys later. Bobby, you want to say goodbye?
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to me talk about depressing German philosophy and warfare. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Listen to my podcast. Listen to Brenton's stuff. I'm sure his poetry reading is going to be great.
All right. Catch you guys.